"It's your brother's birthday. We won't come." That's what my father said when I called to tell them that Evan, me husband, was gone. No pause, no emotion, just that. They were busy celebrating Jason, their golden son, while I was standing alone in a hospital hallway, still holding the sweater Evan wore when he collapsed. At first, I thought I'd misheard, or that maybe later they'd realize how cruel it was. But they didn't. Not at the funeral, not the days after, not even when I sent them the obituary with a single line circled in red. Survived by wife Marley Quinsworld. They didn't show up for Evan. So 6 months later, I made the world show up for me. One headline, one truth. And the same family who once erased me suddenly found themselves erased from everything they thought they controlled. Growing up, I learned early that in our house, love had a hierarchy and I was never at the top. My brother Jason was the chosen one, the miracle child, the straight A, student turned corporate prodigy, turned hometown hero. Every time he sneezed, there was a family dinner to celebrate his resilience. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the reader. The girl who asked too many questions and dared to study journalism instead of finance. "You'll never make a stable living writing," my father once scoffed. "Be more like Jason," he builds. "You just type." Even my mother with her soft smiles and pearl earrings would whisper, "Don't stir things up, Marley. Your father's under a lot of pressure." I stopped trying to be noticed and started carving a life of my own, quietly, stubbornly. That life began to feel real when I met Evan. He wasn't flashy or rich or wildly ambitious. He was just the kind of man who would slow down to help an elderly woman carry groceries. The kind who stayed on the phone when I had panic attacks during deadline weeks. The kind who looked at me like I was enough. I still remember the first time he met my family. My father eyed him like he was a defective product. "What do you do?" he asked, swirling whiskey in his glass. Evan smiled. "I coordinate community health programs at a nonprofit." Silence. Then Jason chimed in with a laugh. "So basically you're unemployed?" My parents laughed. I didn't. Later that night, I apologized. Evan just pulled me close and said, "You don't have to be like them, Marley. You already shine brighter." That was the first time I realized love could feel like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. We got married in a small park under a maple tree surrounded by friends, not family. My father didn't walk me down the aisle. Jason was in Cancun. My mother sent a text that read, "Hope it goes well. Don't forget to smile." We built a life far away from them in Seattle. I became a freelance investigative journalist. Evan worked in public health. We weren't glamorous. We were something better, safe reels. But I'd be lying if I said I never hoped they'd change. That someday my parents would pick up the phone just to ask, "How are you?" That Jason would say, "I'm proud of you, Marley." That maybe if something terrible ever happened, they'd show up. I was wrong. The day Evan died, the illusion shattered, and all that was left was the cold truth. They had never really seen me, and they had no intention of starting now. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were our grocery nights. Evan always insisted on making a list and double-checking the fridge, even if we only needed milk. That night, I found the list still stuck to the fridge door. He never made it to the store. It started with a headache, then dizziness. Then he collapsed on the kitchen floor while I was brushing my hair in the bedroom. I heard the crash and ran in to find him lying there, his lips pale, his eyes wide with confusion. He tried to speak. He always tried to speak, but all that came out was a whisper of my name. Mads. The ambulance came fast. I rode with him clutching his hand, repeating, "You're okay, you're okay, you're okay." But he wasn't. At the hospital, they told me it was a brain aneurysm, massive, inoperable. I sat next to him in the ICU, the beeping machines filling the silence. His skin was still warm, his chest rising and falling slowly. I kept talking to him. I told him about the chicken pot pie I was going to make, how I'd finally fixed the leaky sink, how the cat had found his missing sock. I told him he couldn't leave me, that I needed him, that I still had so many things to tell him. He died at 3:12 a.m. I sat in that sterile room for another hour staring at the stillness. The man who filled every inch of my life with warmth was gone, and the world didn't even pause. Later that morning, I called my parents. Mom answered first. Her voice was groggy, probably still in bed. "Hey, sweetheart. It's early. Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "It's Evan. He passed away last night at the hospital. It was sudden." There was silence on the other end, then a muffled sound like she was covering the receiver. A moment later, Dad was on. His voice wasn't groggy. It was cold clear. "We're sorry to hear that, Marley," he said, formal like a press release. "But it's your brother's birthday tomorrow. We've got guests flying in. Family, you understand." I don't, you're not coming, I asked. "We can't," he said. "Jason's turning 35, it's important." My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "He was my husband," I whispered. "Your son-in-law. He's dead." "Well, send flowers," Dad said flatly. And then he hung up. I stood in the middle of our apartment surrounded by Evan's things, the half-folded laundry, his shoes by the door, the grocery list on the fridge. I stared at all of it, and suddenly it hit me. I wasn't just grieving Evan. I was grieving the family I never really had. That day, something broke in me, but something else woke up too. The church was quiet, almost too quiet. I had chosen a small chapel just outside Seattle. Evan had once said it reminded him of the kind of place where honest people pray. There were no velvet ropes, no marble statues, just weathered wooden pews, sunlight spilling through stained glass, and the soft creak of the door whenever someone entered. Evan would have liked that. The day of the funeral, the sky was overcast. Not stormy, just gray. The kind of sky that seems unsure whether it wants to cry or not. I stood at the entrance in a black coat that didn't feel like mine, greeting the people who came. Evan's colleagues from the nonprofit, our neighbors, old friends from Stanford, even the barista from our regular coffee shop brought a bouquet of wildflowers and tearfully told me he always tipped double when someone looked tired. But my family, their row, sat empty. I had reserved it just in case. 6 full seats near the front. I don't know why. Hope, maybe habit. But they never came. Not even a single text that morning. I delivered Evan's eulogy myself. No priest, no performance, just me standing before a sea of sympathetic eyes holding a folded piece of paper in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I didn't read the words I'd written. Instead, I spoke from the part of me that Evan had always seen and loved. The one that still believed words could heal. "I loved him," I said. Not in the poetic, tragic way movies try to teach us. I loved him on Wednesdays when we forgot to do laundry. I loved him when he burned toast. I loved him when we had nothing. And I'll keep loving him now that I have less than that. There wasn't a dry eye in the room except mine. Because grief hadn't made me cry. It had made me quiet still like a field after fire burned but alive. As people came up to hug me after I watched their faces searching for the one I'd never find there, my mother's. And then I saw it on my phone, a photo posted by Jason. He stood beside a massive golden balloon arch holding a glass of champagne. My parents behind him grinning like the world owed them nothing, and gave them everything. The caption, 35 and thriving, grateful for family. I didn't feel rage, not yet. What I felt was something colder. Like the end of mourning, like the moment you realize the dead aren't the only ones who have left you behind. They'd chosen their celebration. Now I would begin my quiet war. Not with screaming, not with vengeance, but with something far more dangerous. Truth. The world didn't stop, even though mine had. The funeral ended, the guests went home, the flowers wilted, and I stayed in our apartment with Evan's coat still hanging by the door and his toothbrush untouched in the bathroom. At first, I tried to move on like the books and podcasts said, grieve, breathe, rest. But no amount of yoga or tea could quiet the question echoing in my skull. How could they not come? For weeks, I barely left the apartment. I stopped answering calls, even work felt pointless. The stories I used to chase exposees on fraud, misuse of public funds, systemic inequality, none of them could bring Evan back. And yet one name kept popping up. Jason Matthews, my brother, the prodigy, the golden child. The community leader now featured in interviews across California promoting a new civic engagement initiative for young professionals. He wore crisp suits, gave perfect sound bites, talked about impact and integrity. But I knew Jason. I knew what he looked like when no one was watching. Entitled, careless, addicted to praise. Then I saw something strange. One of the nonprofits listed under his campaign had been flagged in a separate report fund. Misallocations, questionable vendor relationships, donors unaware their money was being rerouted. I opened my laptop. It was 2:47 a.m., and for the first time in months, I felt awake. I started pulling records, donations, grants, press releases, IRS filings. It was all there, hidden in plain sight: shell accounts, fake community outreach programs, invoices for consultants that led to Jason's college roommate and his fiancée. The man my parents celebrated while ignoring their grieving daughter was siphoning thousands in public money under the banner of doing good. For a while, I just sat with it, staring at the evidence, feeling the weight of it. Not just the fraud, but the insult, the audacity of it all. They didn't show up for Evan's funeral, but they kept showing up for Jason's lies. And suddenly something inside me clicked. A switch flipped. A voice whispered, "This is your story." I had spent years giving other people a voice, exposing wrongdoings, amplifying the truth. Why not now? Why not this? I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. I wanted my parents to finally see the cost of their choices. But more than that, I wanted the world to see me. Not the forgotten daughter, not the emotional one, not the background character in Jason's highlight reel. I was Marley Quinn, widow, writer, witness, and I was about to turn silence into something sharp enough to pierce through the Matthews family facade. I didn't publish the story right away. This wasn't just journalism, this was personal. And personal, when handled carelessly, becomes poison. So I treated it like I would any investigation, meticulously, ruthlessly, professionally. I created a separate file on an encrypted drive. No names, just initials, no locations, just timestamps and figures. I needed this to be bulletproof, not just for legal protection, but for me, for Evan. I interviewed anonymous donors, tracked shell accounts, and pulled archived interviews where Jason made bold claims I could now prove were lies. I compared receipts from the fake community garden Jason's campaign claimed to fund with photos of an empty lot full of weeds and trash. I even found the name of the company billing the nonprofit Brightstream Solutions registered to a P.O. box that traced back to Jason's college roommate's dog walking business. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I thought about confronting him directly, sending him the files, letting him sweat, but that would have given him time to run, spin the narrative, cry sabotage. No, this wasn't going to be a whisper. It was going to be a bomb delivered in ink and truth. I pitched the story anonymously to the Pacific Observer, a major publication known for its watchdog journalism. I used a pseudonym, M. Quinn. They didn't know who I was. They didn't need to. All they needed was the story. And it was strong, verified, unshakable. The editor emailed back 2 days later. Subject line: "We're running it. Body. This is extraordinary. Legal's reviewing now. If it clears, it's going up next week." My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. This was what I was built for. Not appeasing my parents, not shrinking in Jason's shadow. I was built to expose rot and replace it with truth. And this wasn't just a story about fraud. It was a story about favoritism, about what happens when a family chooses image over integrity. What happens when you silence one child so another can shine. A week passed. I didn't tell a soul. Not Robert, the old editor who mentored me. Not my grief counselor. Not even the Mirror. I just waited and watched. Then one morning, as I poured coffee into Evan's favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle, I opened my laptop. There it was. Headline: The Golden Sun. A deep dive into Jason Matthews' nonprofit empire and the money trail behind the facade. The byline read, "M. Quinn." I sat down slowly, and for the first time since Evan died, I smiled. The story went live at 6:04 a.m. on a Monday. By 6:11, it had been shared over 1,200 times. By 7:0, Jason's face was on the front page of every major media outlet across the West Coast, but not as the rising civic star or the next big hope for social equity. No, now he was a fraud, a figurehead for a fake movement, a cautionary tale. I didn't expect it to go viral that fast, but maybe that's what happens when people are starved for honesty. The headline cut deep. The Golden Sun. How one family's favorite hid fraud behind philanthropy. And right beneath the headline, a photo of Jason shaking hands with the mayor, smiling like he owned the world, now repurposed as a symbol of everything false about it. I didn't answer my phone that day. Not when it buzzed with unknown numbers. Not when a local news anchor left me a voicemail asking for exclusive insights. Not even when the managing editor of The Observer called to offer me a freelance column. I just sat in Evan's chair, wrapped in his old hoodie, watching it all unfold. At 10:43 I got a text from an unknown number. You really did it. No name, but I knew who it was. 10 minutes later, another message came in. Dad is spiraling. Mom is crying. Why did you do this? That one was signed Jason. I didn't reply. He wasn't crying when he pocketed donations that could have fed families. He wasn't thinking of me when he laughed at Evan at our last dinner. He certainly wasn't grieving when he clinked champagne glasses with my parents on the day I buried my husband. At noon, I received an email. No subject line, just one sentence. You chose a funeral. We chose family. Now you've made your choice too. It was from my father. That was when I snapped. Not from rage, from release. I opened my email, typed a response, and deleted it. Then typed again, deleted again, until finally I wrote something that didn't need revision. You chose his birthday. I chose the truth. You raised a son who lied to the world. I buried a man who lived for others. We are not the same. I didn't hit send. I just stared at it for a long while. Then I forwarded it to myself. That was enough. By evening, news trucks were parked outside my parents' gated home in San Jose. Footage of my mother ducking behind tinted SUV windows made it onto cable news. Jason tried to issue a denial on social media miscommunication, he called it. But screenshots don't lie. Wire transfers don't lie. Paper trails don't lie. And the public, they were furious. Former donors demanded refunds. The city council voted to revoke partnership grants. One of the fraudulent vendors was subpoenaed. The IRS opened an audit. And me, I stayed silent because the truth doesn't need to shout when it's this loud. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother. Her coat was too thin for the cold. Her eyes were swollen. Her lipstick was smudged. And for the first time in years, she didn't look composed. She looked lost. Marley, she said, her voice cracking. We didn't know it had gotten this far. I didn't say anything. She stepped forward slowly. I just wanted to see you to understand why. I cut her off. Did you read the story? She nodded. Then you understand. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded photo. It was from Evan and my wedding. One of the few they'd been invited to receive but never attended. I found this in a drawer, she whispered. I thought we had more time. I took the photo from her hand, looked at it, then handed it back. You had time, I said. You just gave it to Jason. She opened her mouth, closed it. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry, she finally said. I believed her, but I didn't let her in. Because forgiveness isn't always a key, it's a boundary. I hope you find peace, I told her. But not at my door. And I shut it gently. Finally, that night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat with Evan's notebook, the one he used to jot down ideas for food justice and community programs. On the last page in his familiar handwriting, he had scribbled, "The truth always feeds someone." I closed the book and whispered, "It fed me, and I meant it." After the firestorm came the stillness. Jason disappeared from the public eye. His accounts went dark. My parents issued a vague statement about being misled by those we trusted, but the damage was done. The Matthews family name had once opened doors. Now it slammed them shut. But I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't watching the news or reading headlines. I was planting tomatoes in a raised bed in a Seattle community garden that Evan once helped design. A place where kids could learn to grow their own food, where seniors could pick herbs for free, where no one asked what your last name was. That was where I started going every morning. No emails, no deadlines, just dirt and sun. Some days I read to the children who came there. Some days I just listened. And every time a child ran up to me with dirt-covered hands and a grin, I saw a flicker of Evan's eyes. My work as a journalist didn't stop. But I changed the way I did it. I wrote under my real name again. Marley Quinn, no longer hiding in initials. I focused on stories about neglected communities, underfunded shelters, unheard voices. And for the first time in my career, editors listened. Readers responded. Donors showed up. One day, an email came from a foundation I hadn't heard of offering funding to expand the community garden into 3 more cities. The sender, a woman who had lost her husband too, she signed off with, "Your words gave me permission to heal." That sentence stayed with me because that's what this had become. Not revenge, not justice, but permission to grieve, to let go, to rebuild, without needing permission from those who never gave it. I didn't hear from my mother again, and I was okay with that. I had stopped waiting for an apology to feel whole. I had found wholeness in small things and growth, in children's laughter and truth, in knowing that while they had erased me from their family tree, I had planted something that would outlive them all. It was autumn again. The air was crisp, and the leaves had begun their slow, golden descent, just like they did the day Evan proposed under that tree near the river trail, where we'd packed peanut butter sandwiches and a lukewarm thermos of coffee. I drove out to the cemetery just after sunrise. No camera crew, no news story, just me, a thermos, and a bouquet of marigolds. He always said marigolds looked like tiny suns trying to stay awake. I used to laugh at that. Now it made me cry, but not today. Today, I sat by his grave and read him my latest column, none about the Seattle kids who built a greenhouse out of recycled windows and leftover wood with herbs named after their grandparents. The one who named her rosemary plant Gloria because Grandma always smelled like soup and sass. Evan would have loved that. I traced my fingers across his name carved in stone. Evan Quinn, beloved husband, community builder, lover of rain and ridiculous sandwiches. Beneath that, my addition etched months after the burial. The truth always feeds someone. That was his legacy. Not just the meals he helped deliver. Not just the laughter or the long walks or the quiet strength he gave me in the dark, but this unshakable belief that telling the truth, even when it hurts, is still an act of love. And I had done that for him, for me, even in a way for them parents who now had no illusions left to hide behind. As I sat in the quiet, sipping from the thermos and listening to the wind through the trees, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not the kind that erases grief, but the kind that coexists with it like two rivers running side by side, never colliding, just flowing. I placed the marigolds gently by the stone, then stood brushing off my coat. I kept my promise, I whispered, and I'll keep going. You gave me a life worth continuing. A breeze passed through, warm and fleeting. I closed my eyes and imagined it was his hand against my cheek, his voice whispering, I knew you would. I turned, walking back toward the garden across the street, the one with the new mural going up. Bright, messy, alive, just like him and just like me.